Fantastic.
It shows it's recording.
Wonderful. All right. So our schools have so much on their plate right now. And with this sort of trying to figure out what's going on and returning to school and all the planning that we have to do. And I just don't know how we're going to have time to even think about PBIS, let alone do it.
I hear that, I feel that, and I see that in my colleagues across my state, and I'm hearing it across the nation every day, you know, in leading news. This is an unprecedented time. I would say the current context is, you know, what to do with learning like it's never happened before, the concerns around personal health and safety, and then bringing youth back into buildings, and thinking about our staff and the other adults in the buildings and the folks who bring our children safely to school. It's just an unprecedented time. And I feel like it's a time to really kind of focus back onto the basics and the core principles of what we can do to really meet the needs of our schools. And even though, you know, teachers are overwhelmed, families are overwhelmed, you know, having just tried to teach at my own home while working full-time in the home, you know, all these things we've been wrestling with and juggling have been very challenging for folks. So I just like think about and reflect on, you know, what things had been working well before we left. Is there anything that we learned, the lessons learned in our distance learning that we can bring back this fall? You know, in our state, all the schools are going on a continuum. They're planning 3 or 4 different models right now, from full-on in-person to a hybrid, all the way over to full-on virtual learning. And that's really challenging to plan for. But I think we have to take a breath and reset and kind of think about the basics and the core principles. So we want to look at the data and how are we getting that data, and how are we getting that data on our families? Do we know what our families need right now, what they've gone through? Our students, you know, do we know if they've had access to computers? Do we know if they've lost loved ones during the COVID? Are they frightened because of the social justice sort of crisis that's also come to the fore at the same time? Are there economic factors in the family? You know, people have lost jobs, people are extra stressed out. So I think the first thing we really need to do is take a step back and kind of, what are the supports that we need for our students, their families, and the staff in the buildings? You know, really thinking about that. What are the practices that we're going to continue to focus on in this new learning environment? Are we going to continue to focus, you know, if we're doing something like open circles, like what did you have in place beforehand? What do the kids and students and families know? If you had a behavior matrix, we're going to have to tweak it likely. But what was working well, and what can you take back into the system? We've got to focus on what the staff have been going through as well. If we're doing open circles and focusing on SEL and supports for students in the classroom, can we restructure some of our systems and practices to do that for adults? Can we have adult Zooms once a week? How are adults able to collaborate and support one another in this environment, both virtually and in person? How can we support the skills, the knowledge, the behavior that adults will need to support youth and students? And then how are we going to translate all this? How are we going to share these expectations and some of the teaching with the students and their families? Like, because likely they will be at home at some point. So are there processes, practices, and systems in place really that are going to be easily communicated to families? You know, I think as school teams get together, they're going to have to really look at all this information, try and figure out, you know, what the families have as supports, what staff and families and students are going to need, and then sort of get back and sort of build that up again. Staying with things that were working well. If you were screening last year and you have great data, there's probably ways that you can continue to screen, because most screenings are teacher facilitated by the teacher's perceptions and assessments. So if there's a way you can do that, that's another piece of data. How can we expand that lens on data to really, as one of our core principles and practices in PBIS, learn about the needs of the students? Are we surveying the staff? What do they really need to move forward? Do they need more tech support? Do they need more social and emotional support. Our staff are also frightened and scared. And so I think we really there's a lot of things to consider, but the tenets remain the same. The operationalized way of doing things may change, but the practices are pretty much still the same. And I'm beeping. All right, my timer went off. You're muted.
You want to stop recording?
Yeah, sure.